When you become untouchable, this is what truly happens. Carl Jung. There comes a moment in every soul's journey when the noise of the world becomes unbearable, not because it is too loud, but because you have grown too sensitive to its hollow echoes. This is the moment when the psyche begins to construct what I call the fortress of solitude, though fortress is perhaps too harsh a word for something built not from stone and mortar, but from the gossamer threads of silence itself. See, the soul does not retreat into isolation out of bitterness or defeat. No. This sacred withdrawal is born from a deeper knowing, a recognition that has been growing like a seed in the darkness of your unconscious for far longer than you realize. It is the recognition that every wound you have carried, every disappointment that has carved its signature into your heart, every moment when the world failed to see your true worth. All of these have been alchemical agents, transforming the base metal of your suffering into the gold of inner knowing. The hermit's journey begins not with a conscious decision, but with an organic turning inward, like a flower closing its petals at dusk. You find yourself less willing to explain yourself to those who have already decided who you are. You discover that the energy you once spent trying to convince others of your value is energy that belongs to a more sacred purpose. The ego, that persistent voice that has spent years negotiating your worth in the marketplace of human opinion, begins to grow quiet, not from exhaustion, but from the dawning awareness that it has been fighting a battle that was never yours to win. This is where the true alchemy begins. Jung understood that the psyche, like the ancient alchemists' lead, must undergo a process of Nigredo, a darkening, a dissolution of what was once solid and certain. But unlike the physical darkness that frightens us, this psychological darkness is pregnant with possibility. It is the darkness of the womb, the darkness of the seed buried in earth, the darkness that precedes every dawn. In this space of withdrawal, something miraculous begins to occur. The desperate need for validation, that gnawing hunger that has driven so many of your choices, begins to dissolve like morning mist touched by the first rays of sun. And what emerges in its place is not emptiness, but fullness, not absence, but presence. The pure essence of being reveals itself, unmarked by the opinions of others, untouched by the projections and expectations that have accumulated like dust on the mirror of your soul. The untouchable state that emerges from this process is perhaps the most misunderstood phenomenon in all of human psychology. The world sees it as coldness, as arrogance, as a turning away from love itself. But those who judge it thus have never experienced the profound warmth that comes from being complete within oneself. They mistake the absence of need for the absence of love, not understanding that true love can only flow from a vessel that is already full. This untouchability is not born from a place of superiority. It cannot be for anyone who has undertaken this journey knows intimately the landscape of their own failings and limitations. Rather, it emerges from a profound realization that your worth exists independent of external recognition, like a star that burns with equal brilliance, whether witnessed by 1,000 eyes or shining alone in empty space. Here, in this chrysalis of detachment, the psyche begins its most sacred work. The shadow, all those aspects of yourself that you have denied, rejected, or hidden away, can no longer be projected onto others when there are no others whose opinions matter enough to distort your vision. The light and dark aspects of your nature begin their slow dance of integration, no longer held apart by the fear of how they might appear to watching eyes. This integration is not a comfortable process. It requires you to acknowledge the parts of yourself that contradict the image you have tried to present to the world. The caring person must embrace their capacity for cruelty. The gentle soul must own their inner warrior. The helper must recognize their own deep needs. The strong must acknowledge their vulnerability. But in this acknowledgement lies freedom, the freedom to be whole rather than perfect, complete rather than sanitized. The fortress of solitude is thus revealed to be not a prison but a temple, not a place of exile but a place of communion with the deepest truths of your existence. The walls that seem to separate you from the world are actually creating the sacred space necessary for you to finally meet yourself without the distorting mirrors of other people's perceptions. In this sanctuary, you begin to hear voices you have never heard before, not the voices of madness, but the voices of wisdom that have been drowned out by the cacophony of social expectation. The voice of your authentic desires, unmarked by what you think you should want. The voice of your genuine values, uncorrupted by what others have taught you to believe. The voice of your true calling, unsilenced by fear of judgment or failure. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to hear the voice of your own love, not the conditional love that must be earned through performance and achievement, but the unconditional love that simply is, like breath, like heartbeat, like the faithful turning of the earth around the sun. This love asks nothing of you except that you continue to exist, continue to be, continue to unfold according to your own mysterious design. This is the beginning of becoming untouchable, not because you no longer feel, but because your feelings are now your own. Not because you no longer care, but because your caring is no longer dependent on reciprocation. Not because you have closed your heart, but because you have finally opened it to the one person who was always meant to dwell. There, yourself. The mask begins to crack, not all at once, but slowly, like ancient paint peeling from a forgotten wall. What the world has called you for so many years, this carefully constructed persona that has smiled when it wanted to weep, agreed when it longed to rebel, stayed quiet when it burned to speak, this false self begins to reveal its true nature. It was never truly you at all, but merely a survival mechanism worn so long it had fused with your very identity. You feel it first, as a strange exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness that no amount of sleep can cure. It is the fatigue of the actor who has played the same role for decades, who has forgotten that beneath the costume lies a person with their own dreams, their own voice, their own way of moving through the world. The persona, Jung's term for this social mask we all wear, has served its purpose well, protecting the tender, authentic self from a world that seemed too harsh, too judging, too ready to reject what it could not understand. But there comes a moment when the soul can no longer bear the weight of this performance. The mask that once felt necessary now feels suffocating. The smile that once came easily now requires tremendous effort. The words that once flowed to please others now stick in your throat like lies, which in their deepest essence they have always been. Not malicious lies, but the gentle deceptions we tell ourselves and others to maintain the illusion of social harmony. This is the beginning of what the mystics have always called the dark night of the soul, though it might be more accurately described as the dark night of the persona. Everything you thought you knew about yourself, your preferences, your beliefs, your very personality, suddenly feels suspect, inauthentic, borrowed from sources you can no longer remember. Who chose these clothes? Who decided you should speak this way, think these thoughts, want these things? The questions arise like bubbles from some deep underwater spring, each one disturbing the carefully maintained surface of your constructed identity. The dissolution begins subtly. You find yourself less willing to laugh at jokes that aren't funny, less eager to agree with opinions that feel foreign to your inner knowing. The automatic responses that once smoothed your social interactions begin to falter. Where once you might have said, "I'm fine," without thinking, you now pause, wondering if you are fine, and if not, whether you owe anyone the pretense that you are. This is terrifying territory for the ego, which has invested so much energy in maintaining the persona that it cannot imagine survival without it. The ego whispers its fears. Without this mask, who will love you? Without this performance, who will accept you? Without these careful accommodations to others' expectations, who will you be? These questions echo in the chambers of your changing psyche, like the cries of a child afraid of the dark, but something deeper than ego, call it the self, call it soul, call it the eternal witness within, recognizes this dissolution not as death, but as birth. Like autumn leaves that must fall to nourish the earth below, the false self must die for the authentic self to emerge. This is not destruction, but sacred metamorphosis. Though the caterpillar cannot know the butterfly it will become. The process is rarely gentle. Years of accumulated social conditioning do not dissolve without resistance. The personas we have worn, the good daughter, the reliable employee, the understanding friend, the strong provider, these identities fight for their survival with every tool at their disposal. They manifest as guilt when you fail to meet others, expectations as anxiety when you consider revealing your true thoughts, as a sense of betrayal when you choose your authentic desires over social obligations. But beneath this struggle, something magnificent is stirring. Your true preferences begin to emerge like flowers pushing through concrete, delicate at first, easily crushed, but possessed of an irrepressible life force. You discover that you have opinions you never knew you held, desires you never allowed yourself to acknowledge, ways of being that feel both foreign and intimately familiar, like meeting a twin you never knew existed. The world may not understand this transformation. Others may mourn the loss of the person they thought they knew, not realizing that person was always a construction, a compromise, a carefully edited version of something far more complex and beautiful. They may accuse you of changing, of becoming someone else, not understanding that you are not becoming someone else. You are finally becoming yourself. This death of the persona is perhaps the most crucial passage in the journey toward becoming untouchable. For how can you be truly untouchable while still wearing a mask that can be removed by others' disapproval? How can you be sovereign while still dependent on a false identity that requires constant maintenance and validation? The mask must fall away, not through force, but through the simple recognition that it no longer serves the being you are becoming. In its place, something authentic begins to emerge. Not perfect, not polished, not designed to please everyone, but real in a way that no persona can ever be. This emerging self may be rough around the edges, may speak truths that make others uncomfortable, may want things that don't fit neatly into social categories. But it is yours, wholly and completely yours, in a way that no constructed identity could ever be. The butterfly of individual authenticity begins to unfold its wings. Now comes the descent, the voluntary journey into what the ancient alchemists called Nigredo, the blackening, the necessary darkness that precedes all true transformation. This is not the darkness of depression or despair, though it may wear those masks at times. This is the sacred darkness of decomposition, of dissolution, of the ego's careful constructions finally surrendering to forces greater than its own understanding. The untouchable soul recognizes this descent not as punishment, but as invitation, an invitation to explore the depths that most spend their entire lives avoiding. Where others flee from the uncomfortable truths lurking in their psychological shadows, you now turn toward them with something approaching curiosity, even reverence. For you have begun to understand what the mystics and depth psychologists have always known, that gold can only be extracted from the darkness of the earth, that pearls form only in the irritating pressure of the oyster's depths. This is psychological winter in its purest form. The landscape of your inner world, once familiar and navigable, now appears strange and barren. The landmarks by which you once oriented yourself, your roles, your relationships, your carefully maintained self-image, have been stripped away like leaves from trees, leaving only the essential structures visible against a stark sky. And, in this starkness, you begin to see clearly for perhaps the first time in your life. The descent begins with a profound letting go. Not the forced letting go of someone trying to practice spiritual disciplines, but the organic release that comes when the soul finally acknowledges that what it has been grasping was never truly nourishing. Old patterns of need and attachment, worn smooth by years of repetition, begin their slow decomposition. The desperate hunger for approval, the compulsive need to be needed, the addiction to drama and intensity as proof of aliveness, all of these begin to break down like fallen leaves returning to the earth. This decomposition is not comfortable. The ego, faced with the dissolution of everything it has used to define itself, sends up cries of alarm that echo through the empty chambers of your changing psyche. It protests with every tool at its disposal: anxiety about the future, regret about the past, shame about your changing priorities, guilt about disappointing others. These are the death cries of a structure that has served its purpose, but can no longer contain the expanding consciousness that seeks to emerge. But beneath these surface disturbances, something else is at work. The self, that deeper, eternal aspect of your being that Jung recognized as the true center of personality, remains untouched by the ego's dissolution. It watches with patient compassion as the old forms crumble, knowing that this destruction is not an ending, but a beginning. Like a master gardener who understands that compost creates the richest soil, the self allows the decomposition to proceed at its own pace, trusting in the wisdom of the process. In this darkness, you encounter aspects of yourself that have been buried for years, perhaps decades, desires you deemed too selfish to acknowledge, anger you thought too dangerous to feel, dreams you considered too impractical to pursue, needs you judged too basic to admit. These shadow aspects of your psyche, long denied and projected onto others, now demand recognition and integration. They rise from the depths, like forgotten memories, carrying both the pain of their banishment and the power of their truth. The temptation during this phase is to judge these emerging aspects of yourself, to try to push them back into the darkness from which they came. But the alchemical process requires that nothing be rejected, nothing be deemed unworthy of transformation. Every aspect of your psychological nature, no matter how uncomfortable or unacceptable it may seem, contains within it a seed of gold, waiting to be refined. You discover that your capacity for indifference contains within it the seed of healthy boundaries. Your ability to be cold holds the potential for discrimination and discernment. Your hidden selfishness, when transformed, becomes healthy self-care. Your buried anger, when integrated, becomes righteous passion for justice and truth. Nothing is wasted in the alchemical process. Everything can be transformed if it is first fully acknowledged and accepted. This is the great paradox of the Nigredo phase. You must be willing to see yourself as potentially monstrous in order to discover your true divinity. You must be willing to acknowledge your capacity for every human failing in order to transcend the limitations of ordinary morality and enter the realm of genuine compassion. For true compassion can only arise from the recognition that you are capable of everything you see and judge in others. The descent continues, layer by layer, year by year sometimes, until you reach the bedrock of your being. Here, in the deepest chambers of your psyche, you encounter not the enemy you might have expected, but the friend you had forgotten. Here dwells the indestructible essence of who you are, not the who you have tried to become, not the who others wanted you to be, but the who you have always been beneath every mask and persona and protective adaptation. This essence cannot be touched by criticism or praise, cannot be diminished by failure or inflated by success. It simply is, like the space in which all experience arises and passes away. And from this space, this ground of being, the resurrection that must come begins to stir. The fertile soil created by the decomposition of the old self becomes the garden in which new consciousness will bloom, more authentic and more powerful than anything that came before. The darkness is not empty after all, but pregnant with infinite possibility. From the fertile darkness of Nigredo emerges something unprecedented, in your experience. A profound indifference to the opinions of others, not the bitter indifference of the hurt and defensive, nor the cold indifference of the disconnected and withdrawn, but something far more mysterious and powerful, the warm indifference of the emotionally sovereign, the gentle indifference of one who has discovered an inner fire that needs no external fuel to burn. Others' opinions begin to feel like distant thunder, acknowledged but no longer feared, heard but no longer heeded as prophecy. You notice them the way you might notice the sound of traffic from a window, aware of their presence but no longer compelled to respond. This shift is so subtle at first that you might not even recognize it as the revolution it truly is. But gradually you begin to realize that the opinions of others, which once had the power to elevate or devastate you, now hold no more sway than shadows cast by passing clouds. This is not numbness, quite the opposite. You feel more deeply than ever before, but your feelings are now your own, untainted by the projections and expectations of others. When someone criticizes you, you feel it, but the criticism no longer reaches the core of your being, where your sense of self resides. It strikes the surface and bounces off like rain on a properly sealed roof. The mirror of others' judgments still reflects an image, but that image no longer determines how you see yourself. The freedom that comes from this emotional sovereignty is almost intoxicating at first. You realize that you have spent most of your life in a kind of prison you didn't even know existed, a prison where your sense of worth was determined by the ever-changing opinions of people who were themselves trapped in their own unconscious projections and unhealed wounds. To step outside this prison is to discover that the world is far larger and more beautiful than you ever imagined. This indifference is not born from a place of superiority or disdain. It cannot be cultivated through effort or willpower, cannot be achieved through spiritual practices or psychological techniques. It emerges naturally from the deep recognition that others' opinions of you are really not about you at all, but about their own unresolved psychological material, their own fears and desires and unmet needs. When someone judges you harshly, they are revealing more about their own inner landscape than about yours. When someone praises you excessively, they are often seeking something from you that you may not even be able to give. Understanding this, you begin to see the futility of trying to manage others' perceptions of you. It is like trying to control the weather, an exhausting endeavor that ultimately serves no one. You realize that the energy you once spent in this impossible task is energy that belongs to a more sacred purpose, the continuous creation and refinement of your authentic self. In this space of indifference, authentic power is born. Not the power to control or manipulate others, not the power to force the world to conform to your will, but the far more profound power to govern your own inner landscape. This is the power to choose your response to any situation, to remain centered in your own truth, regardless of external circumstances, to be the author of your own emotional experience rather than its victim. You discover that you can stand in the middle of a storm of criticism and remain unmoved, not because you have hardened your heart, but because you have found the still point within yourself that no external force can touch. You can receive praise without being inflated by it, disappointment without being crushed by it, love without being possessed by it, rejection without being diminished by it. This is the freedom of the emotionally sovereign, the freedom to experience life fully without being enslaved by it. The paradox of this indifference is that it makes you more lovable, not less. When you are no longer desperate for approval, you become more genuinely yourself. When you are no longer afraid of disapproval, you become more authentic in your expressions. When you are no longer controlled by others' emotions, you become more capable of genuine intimacy. People sense this quality in you, even if they cannot name it. They feel safer around you because they know you will not use them to fulfill your unmet emotional needs. This indifference also extends to your own past selves. You become able to look back at your mistakes and failures without the crushing weight of regret or shame. These experiences become simply data, information about paths that did not serve you, rather than evidence of your inadequacy. You can acknowledge your past without being defined by it, learn from it without being imprisoned by it. The warm fire of inner sovereignty burns steady and bright, requiring no external validation to maintain its flame. You have become like a mountain that needs not announce its majesty, like a river that needs not apologize for its flow. Your very presence speaks of a power that is not power over others, but power within yourself. The power to be, to exist, to unfold according to your own mysterious design, without requiring permission or approval from anyone else. This is the mirror of indifference, not a reflection of coldness, but of the profound warmth that comes from being complete within yourself, from having discovered the inexhaustible source of love and approval that was always waiting to be found in the depths of your own being. In this space of profound indifference to external validation, something magical begins to occur. Solitude transforms from exile into sanctuary, from punishment into the most exquisite privilege. What once felt like loneliness, that aching emptiness that drove you to seek company, distraction, anything to fill the void, now reveals itself as something entirely different. It becomes a sacred chamber where the deepest conversations of your life finally become possible. The untouchable soul discovers that solitude is not the absence of company, but the presence of the most fascinating companion you will ever encounter, your own authentic self. In the cathedral of your own company, with its high vaulted silences and light filtering through stained glass thoughts, you begin to hear sounds that were always there, but drowned out by the constant noise of social interaction, the endless chatter of trying to be understood, accepted, validated by minds that were grappling with their own unresolved complexities. Here, in this sanctuary of aloneness, you learn to commune with wellsprings of creativity and wisdom that flow only in silence. Ideas that would never dare to surface, in the presence of judgment or the pressure to be immediately useful, begin to bubble up from some deep aquifer of consciousness. Insights that were too delicate to survive in the harsh light of social scrutiny now unfold like night-blooming flowers, revealing their beauty to the patient observer who has learned to wait in silence. The conversation with the self begins in earnest now, not the self-talk of the anxious mind rehearsing social interactions or reviewing past failures, but something far more profound. This is dialogue in the truest sense, a back-and-forth exchange between different aspects of your psyche that have been waiting their entire existence for the safety to speak their truth without fear of judgment or rejection. As the noise of the world fades, the constant hum of other people's expectations, the endless stream of information designed to keep you distracted from your own inner knowing, the cultural programming that insists you must always be producing, performing, proving your worth, a symphony begins to emerge. It is the symphony of your own inner voices, each one representing a different facet of your complete psychological nature. The wise elder within you finally has space to offer counsel, sharing the hard-won wisdom of your experiences, the patterns you have observed, the truths you have learned but never had time to fully integrate. This elder speaks slowly, thoughtfully, with the patience of one who has learned that wisdom cannot be rushed, only received in its own time. The eternal child, Within you begins to play again, to wonder, to ask the questions that adults have learned to suppress as impractical or naive. This child reminds you of dreams you once held, of the sense of magic and possibility that existed before the world convinced you to be more realistic. In solitude, this child's voice is not childish, but childlike, carrying the freshness of perception that sees beyond the limitations that experience has taught you to accept. The warrior within you stands guard at the gates of your consciousness, no longer needed to defend against external threats, but available now to protect your authenticity, your creative process, your right to exist exactly as you are. This warrior has learned to discriminate between what serves your highest good and what diminishes it, becoming a fierce guardian of your energy and attention. The lover within you, not just the romantic lover, but the aspect that appreciates beauty, that connects deeply with life itself, begins to court existence with a passion that no external relationship could ever match. This lover finds ecstasy in the simple fact of being alive, in the miracle of consciousness, in the endless creativity of the universe expressing itself through your unique perspective. Each of these voices, and countless others, finally has the space to contribute to the rich inner dialogue that shapes your understanding of yourself and your place in the world. Without the pressure to conform to external expectations, without the need to present a unified, socially acceptable facade, your psyche can finally reveal its true complexity and richness. In this solitude, you begin to understand why the great mystics and artists and philosophers have always sought time alone. Not because they were antisocial or unable to connect with others, but because they understood that the most profound connections with life itself can only occur in the silence of deep solitude. They knew that the wellspring of creativity and wisdom that flows from authentic solitude is the source from which all genuine contribution to the world must come. You discover that you are not alone in solitude, but in the company of all the greatest minds and souls who have ever lived. For in solitude you tap into the same source of wisdom and creativity that has inspired humanity's greatest achievements. The insights that arise in your cathedral of silence are not just personal, but universal, not just individual, but archetypal. The alchemy of solitude transforms the base metal of loneliness into the gold of genuine self-communion, where every moment alone becomes an opportunity for deeper understanding, greater creativity, and more authentic self-expression. Here unfolds one of the universe's most exquisite ironies, a cosmic joke so profound that it reveals the fundamental paradox at the heart of all human longing. The moment you become truly untouchable, when you have finally released your desperate grip on others' approval, when you have found the source of validation within yourself, when you have learned to be complete in your own company, you become irresistibly magnetic. This is enantiodromia in its purest form, Jung's term for the psychological law that governs the tendency of everything to eventually transform into its opposite. The very indifference that repels the needy, the clingy, the emotionally desperate, acts like a powerful magnet drawing the authentic toward you. It is as if the universe has been waiting for you to stop chasing what you thought you wanted in order to deliver what you actually need. The untouchable being radiates something that cannot be faked or manufactured. The quiet confidence of someone who has nothing to prove and nothing to lose. This is not the brittle confidence of the insecure trying to convince themselves and others of their worth, not the performative confidence of those who speak loudly to mask their inner uncertainty. This is the deep, unshakable confidence that comes from having touched the bedrock of your own being and found it solid, found it real, found it sufficient. You move through the world differently now. Your steps carry the weight of someone who knows where they stand, not in relation to others, but in relation to themselves. Your voice carries the authority of someone who speaks from their own truth, rather than from borrowed wisdom or anticipated approval. Your silence carries the power of someone who has nothing to hide and nothing to defend. This creates a gravitational field around you, an invisible force that attracts those who recognize genuine power when they encounter it. But this attraction is selective in the most beautiful way. Those who are still trapped in the cycle of seeking external validation feel uncomfortable in your presence. Your indifference to their approval tactics, your immunity to their emotional manipulations, your refusal to participate in the games they have spent their lives perfecting. All of this leaves them feeling confused and somewhat bereft. But those who have done their own inner work, those who have also touched the depths of their own being, those who recognize authenticity because they have cultivated it within themselves. These souls are drawn to you like moths to flame, like plants, turning toward the sun. They sense in you something they have been seeking, the permission to be themselves without apology, the example of someone who has found their way home to their own nature. The magnetic quality you now possess is not about charisma in the conventional sense. You are not necessarily more charming, more entertaining, or more socially skilled than you were before. Indeed, you may be less of all these things, having shed the personas that once made you so accommodating to others' needs and expectations. But you are more real, more present, more genuinely yourself. And this authenticity acts like a beacon in a world full of people pretending to be something they are not. Others find themselves inexplicably drawn to your company, though they may not understand why. They sense that in your presence, they too can relax the masks they wear, can speak truths they normally keep hidden, can be themselves without the constant vigilance that social interaction usually requires. You become a safe harbor for authenticity, a place where the real self can emerge without fear of judgment or rejection. This attraction operates on multiple levels. Professionally, opportunities begin to flow toward you as if drawn by some invisible current. Not because you are networking or self-promoting, but because people sense your genuine confidence and want to be associated with it. Personally, relationships deepen or dissolve. The shallow connections that were based on mutual neediness fall away, while the connections based on genuine appreciation and respect grow stronger. The paradox extends to romance as well. Having given up the chase, having stopped trying to make yourself attractive to others, you discover that you have become genuinely attractive in a way that transcends physical appearance or social status. You radiate the kind of wholeness that calls to other whole people, the kind of completeness that doesn't need completion from another, but can share its fullness freely. You begin to understand that everything you had been seeking externally was actually repelling the very things you wanted most. Your neediness repelled those capable of genuine love. Your desperation for approval repelled those whose approval was actually worth having. Your willingness to compromise your authenticity for acceptance attracted only those who had no real appreciation for who you truly were. But now, standing in your own power, complete in your own being, indifferent to the opinions of those who do not know you deeply, you have become a magnet for everything that truly serves your highest good. The universe, it seems, was simply waiting for you to stop grasping in order to place in your open hands the very gifts you had been seeking all along. This is the great secret of attraction. It is not about making yourself more appealing to others, but about becoming so appealing to yourself that your self-love becomes a force that draws all authentic love toward you. From this place of magnetic wholeness, the untouchable soul begins to construct something that has been absent from their life for far too long, sacred boundaries. These rise around your being like temple walls, not the harsh barriers of the wounded and defensive, not the rigid fortifications of those who have closed their hearts to the world, but something far more sophisticated and beautiful. These are the elegant boundaries of one who has learned to honor their own sacred nature. The paradox of these boundaries is profound. They are not built to keep the world out, but to keep the self in. For too long, you have allowed your energy, your attention, your very essence to leak out through 1,000 small compromises, 1,000 accommodations to others' needs and expectations, 1,000 ways of saying yes when your deepest truth wanted to say no. Now, having discovered the precious nature of your authentic being, you become its devoted guardian. These boundaries are not rigid barriers that block all passage, but permeable membranes with an almost mystical intelligence. They allow what serves your highest good to enter while filtering out what diminishes your essential nature. Like the cell walls that protect living organisms while allowing nutrients to pass through, your boundaries become sophisticated filtering systems that can distinguish between what nourishes your soul and what depletes it. The untouchable being becomes a masterful guardian of their own energy, learning to treat their attention as the sacred resource it has always been. You begin to recognize that your energy is not infinite, that your emotional reserves are not bottomless, that your time and presence are precious gifts that should be offered consciously rather than scattered unconsciously to whoever happens to ask for them. Learning to say no becomes an art form, a spiritual practice that you approach with the same grace you once used to say yes to everything and everyone. But this is not the harsh no of rejection or the guilty no of someone who feels they should be saying yes. This is the gentle, firm no of someone who knows their own worth, who understands that by protecting their energy, they are actually protecting their ability to serve what truly matters. You discover that every yes you speak carries more weight. Now, because it comes from genuine choice rather than obligation, from authentic desire rather than social programming. When you say yes, people can feel the fullness behind it, the presence that comes from someone who is not scattered across a dozen unwanted commitments, but gathered fully into the moment at hand. This is not selfishness in any conventional sense, though others may mistake it for such. This is self-preservation of the highest order, the recognition that you cannot pour from an empty cup, cannot give what you do not possess, cannot serve others from a place of depletion without ultimately serving no one well. The untouchable soul understands that the most generous thing they can do is to maintain the fullness of their own being, so that any giving flows from abundance rather than neediness. Your boundaries become a gift to others as well, though they may not immediately recognize it as such. By refusing to enable their unconscious patterns, by declining to participate in their dramas, by not allowing them to use you to avoid their own necessary growth, you force them to encounter themselves more directly. Some will appreciate this gift eventually, others will resent it indefinitely. Your boundary is not responsible for their response. The sacred nature of these boundaries reveals itself in their flexibility. They are not walls but membranes, not rules but principles, not rigid structures but living responses to the ever-changing circumstances of life. With your child, your boundaries might be permeable in ways they never would be with a casual acquaintance. With your creative work, you might allow interruptions that you would never permit during your rest time. The boundaries serve the self, not the other way around. You learn to say no to good opportunities so that you can say yes to great ones. You decline invitations to events that would drain you so that you have energy for experiences that feed your soul. You stop making yourself available to people who take without giving so that you can be fully present for those who appreciate and reciprocate your care. The guardian within you becomes increasingly sophisticated, able to sense from miles away the approach of energy vampires, emotional manipulators, and those who mistake your kindness for weakness. But this guardian is not paranoid or suspicious. It simply knows the difference between authentic connection and unconscious using, between genuine need and manufactured drama, between healthy reciprocity and subtle exploitation. Others notice the change in you, though they may not understand what has shifted. They find they cannot manipulate you as easily as before, cannot guilt you into compliance, cannot bypass your conscious choices through emotional pressure. Some will respect this new strength. Others will test it repeatedly, unable to believe that you have truly changed. But you have changed, fundamentally and permanently. You have learned that true compassion sometimes requires saying no, that real love sometimes demands boundaries, that authentic service flows from fullness rather than emptiness. The temple, walls that surround your sacred self, are not barriers to love, but its very foundation. For love without boundaries is not love, but codependence. Service without limits is not generosity, but martyrdom. In becoming the guardian of your own boundaries, you become capable of deeper intimacy than ever before. For true intimacy can only exist between two whole beings who choose to share their completeness rather than seeking completion from each other. There comes a moment in the soul's journey when the fever of speaking ceases, when the endless commentary that once filled every corner of consciousness falls away like autumn leaves returning to earth. In this sacred pause, something extraordinary emerges, not the absence of voice, but the discovery of a language that predates words, a tongue that speaks in frequencies the heart recognizes before the mind can translate. You have arrived at Nigredo, the threshold of the great silence, that profound stillness where the untouchable soul learns to communicate through presence alone. This is not the silence of the withdrawn or the mute, but the eloquent quiet of mountains at dawn, of ancient trees that have witnessed centuries without uttering a single word, yet speak volumes to those who know how to listen with their entire being. The journey to this silence has been long and often treacherous. You have traveled through the cacophony of the ego's endless demands, navigated the shadow's whispered provocations, and emerged from the cocoon of your former self transformed. Now, in this space between the death of who you were and the full emergence of who you are becoming, you discover that silence is not empty. It is pregnant with the fullness of existence itself. In Jungian terms, this silence represents the maturation of the self, that archetype of wholeness that encompasses both the spoken and the unspoken, the manifest and the potential. The ego, in its earlier stages, believed that to exist was to be heard, to be validated was to be vocal, to matter was to make noise. But the self knows differently. The self understands that true authority emanates not from the volume of one's voice, but from the depth of one's presence. Consider the mountain. Does it need to announce its majesty? Does it require billboards proclaiming its height, its age, its enduring strength? The mountain simply is, and in its being it commands reverence. Its silence is not passive but actively powerful, drawing pilgrims from across the world who sense something in its wordless presence that speaks to the deepest chambers of their souls. You too have become like this mountain. Your inner work has carved valleys of wisdom within you, raised peaks of understanding that touch the sky of consciousness itself. This transformation from speaker to presence represents one of the most profound shifts in human development. Where once you might have felt compelled to fill every pause with explanation, every silence with sound, you now recognize that silence holds its own intelligence. It is in the spaces between words that meaning often resides, in the pauses between thoughts that insight emerges, in the stillness between breaths that life reveals its most intimate secrets. Others sense this quality in you immediately, though they may not be able to name it. There is something about your presence that settles the room, that creates a field of calm in which others can discover their own depth. You have become what Jung would call a container, not in the sense of holding others' projections, but in providing a spacious presence in which authentic encounter becomes possible. Your silence invites others into their own stillness. Your peace gives others permission to set down the burden of constant performance. This is the authority of being fully present to oneself, and therefore to life itself. It is not the authority of dominance or control, but the natural influence that flows from wholeness. like a tuning fork that, when struck, causes other instruments nearby to vibrate at the same frequency. Your presence attunes others to deeper possibilities within themselves. You need not preach or teach or convince. Your very being has become the message. The paradox of this silence is that it contains all voices. Having integrated the various aspects of your psyche, the enthusiastic child, the critical parent, the wise elder, the wild rebel, you carry within you a choir of perspectives, but you no longer need to give each one the stage. Instead, they harmonize within you, creating a resonant quiet that speaks more powerfully than any solo performance ever could. In this silence, you discover what the mystics have always known, that true communication happens in the realm beyond words, where soul recognizes soul, where presence meets presence in the vast field of being. You realize that you have been preparing for this silence your entire life, through every word you've spoken and regretted, every truth you've struggled to articulate, every moment when language felt insufficient to capture the enormity of your experience. Now finally, you understand that some truths can only be transmitted through presence. Some wisdom can only be shared through the quality of one's being. Your silence becomes an invitation for others to discover their own untouchable nature, your stillness, a doorway through which they might glimpse the profound peace that lives at the center of all seeking. In choosing to be rather than to speak, to embody rather than to explain, you have found the most powerful voice of all, the voice of the integrated self, speaking its truth through the simple, revolutionary act of fully inhabiting your own existence. There is a profound misunderstanding that haunts the human heart. The belief that to be untouchable, one must become invulnerable, that to be whole, one must be impenetrable. But the soul that has journeyed through its own depths knows a different truth entirely. True untouchability is not the absence of feeling, but the presence of such deep feeling that it cannot be disturbed by external storms. It is the paradox of the phoenix, a being so familiar with fire that flames become its ally rather than its enemy. You have arrived at this sacred understanding through countless cycles of burning and renewal. Each time life brought you to your knees, each moment, when your heart felt as though it might shatter from the intensity of caring, you discovered something remarkable. Your essence remained intact. Not untouched, but unbroken. Not unfeeling, but undefeated by feeling. Like the mythical phoenix that rises from its own ashes, you have learned that destruction and creation are often the same process, wearing different masks. The ego, in its primitive understanding, equates strength with armor, power with protection. It builds walls and moats, creates elaborate defense systems designed to keep pain at bay. But the self, that deeper, wiser aspect of your being, knows that true invincibility comes not from avoiding the fire, but from learning to dance within it. The phoenix does not fear the flames because it understands them as the very mechanism of its renewal. This is the great secret of vulnerability. It is not weakness disguised as strength, but strength so confident in itself that it can afford to be transparent. When you know, beyond doubt, that your core essence is indestructible, you can open your heart completely. You can love without the terror of loss, care without the anxiety of attachment, feel deeply without the fear that feeling will consume. Jung understood this principle when he wrote about the necessity of psychological death and rebirth. The ego must burn, not once but repeatedly, for the self to emerge in its full radiance. Each time you allow yourself to be vulnerable, you're essentially offering yourself to the flames of transformation. And each time you emerge, you discover that what you thought would destroy you has instead refined you, like gold tested in fire. The untouchable soul has learned to be vulnerable without being weak, a distinction that the wounded psyche struggles to comprehend. Weakness seeks sympathy, validation, someone else to carry the burden of its pain. Vulnerability, in its mature form, simply acknowledges what is present without needing it to be different. It says, yes, I am feeling this deeply, and I am strong enough to hold it all. It opens not because it needs something from others, but because openness is its natural state. Consider how this manifests in relationship. The ego loves with conditions, with contracts both spoken and unspoken. It says, I will love you if you love me back, if you validate my worth, if you fulfill my needs. But the phoenix heart loves because love is its nature, not because love serves its agenda. It cares without being attached, which is perhaps the most difficult spiritual discipline of all, to allow your heart to be touched without clinging to the one who touches it. This is not indifference masquerading as wisdom. This is fierce tenderness, passionate presence that holds nothing back yet grasps nothing. You have learned to be open without being available to every demand, caring without being responsible for every outcome. Your heart has become like a river, constantly flowing, constantly giving, yet never depleted because it trusts in the endless spring of its own depth. The external storms that once threatened to overwhelm you now pass through your awareness like weather through sky. Not because you have become numb, but because you have discovered the vast space within yourself that can hold all weather without being disturbed by any of it. Joy moves through you like sunlight, grief like rain, anger like thunder, all natural phenomena arising and passing within the unchanging awareness that you have learned to identify as your true self. Others can sense this quality in you immediately. There is something both fierce and gentle in your presence, something that invites intimacy while maintaining perfect sovereignty. You have become what Jung called a wounded healer, one who has been broken open so completely that the light pours through the cracks, illuminating not only your own path, but offering guidance to others still lost in the labyrinth of their own becoming. This phoenix nature allows you to engage fully with life while remaining fundamentally unshakable. You can enter the full spectrum of human experience, the ecstasy and the agony, the triumph and the tragedy, without losing yourself in any of it. Your vulnerability has become your invincibility, your openness, your ultimate protection. You have learned the deepest secret of all, that which cannot be destroyed, cannot be truly threatened, and love itself is the most indestructible force in the universe. In the grand ballroom of existence, most souls approach life like wrestlers grappling with an opponent, muscles straining, breath labored, desperately trying to pin down circumstances that refuse to be controlled. But you who have traveled through the fires of transformation and emerged as something beyond the reach of ordinary suffering, you have learned an entirely different way of moving through the world. You have discovered the dance of detachment, that sublime choreography where engagement and freedom merge into a single, flowing movement. This is not the detachment of the spiritually bypassed, those who mistake numbness for enlightenment, disconnection for wisdom. No, this is detachment as the highest form of connection, loving without clinging, caring without controlling, being present without being possessive. It is the difference between holding water in cupped hands and trying to grasp it with clenched fists. One allows the water to rest momentarily in your palms before flowing onward. The other ensures the water will slip through your fingers, leaving only the ache of empty hands. Jung understood this principle when he explored the concept of enantiodromia, the tendency of things to transform into their opposites. The ego's attempt to possess actually creates loss. Its struggle to control generates chaos. Its desperate need for security breeds the very insecurity it seeks to avoid. But the self, in its mature wisdom, has learned to dance with this paradox rather than fight against it. It understands that true possession comes through releasing, true control through surrendering, true security through accepting the fundamental groundlessness of existence. You have become like the river that carves canyons, not through force, but through persistence, not through resistance, but through flow. Where once you might have exhausted yourself trying to change the shape of the stones in your path, you now allow your movement around them to gradually reshape both the landscape and yourself. This is the dance of the wise, engaged yet unattached, committed yet free, loving yet independent. In relationships, this translates into a revolutionary way of being with others. The ego loves with contracts, spoken and unspoken. I will love you if you love me back. I will support you if you support me. I will be here for you if you promise never to leave. But the detached heart loves, because love is its nature, not because love serves its agenda. It offers itself fully while simultaneously holding nothing back. A paradox that only the heart can understand, never the mind. This does not mean you become indifferent or aloof. Quite the opposite. Your love becomes more fierce precisely because it is free, more present because it is undemanding, more powerful because it requires nothing in return. You care deeply while understanding that caring does not mean carrying. You feel intensely while knowing that feeling does not mean fixing. You commit completely while recognizing that commitment does not mean control. The dance requires you to move with life's rhythms rather than impose your own tempo. Sometimes the music speeds up and you find yourself spinning through periods of intensity, change, challenge. Other times it slows to an almost imperceptible waltz and you learn to appreciate the subtle beauty of stillness, of maintenance, of simply being present to what is. The untouchable soul moves gracefully through both tempos, never rushing the slow passages nor resisting the quick ones. This is perhaps most evident in how you relate to outcomes. The ego is obsessed with results, constantly measuring, comparing, judging whether things are going according to plan. But you have learned to find fulfillment in the dance itself, regardless of where it leads. You plant seeds not because you must see the harvest, but because planting is what gardeners do. You offer your gifts not because you need recognition, but because giving is how love expresses itself through you. The great choreographer of existence, call it God, the universe, the Tao, or simply the mysterious intelligence that moves through all things, becomes your dance partner rather than your adversary. You learn to sense its lead, to follow its subtle cues, to trust that even when you cannot see the next steps, the dance itself knows where it is going. This requires a profound faith, not in any particular outcome, but in the process itself. Others can feel this quality in your presence immediately. There is something both intensely engaged and completely free about the way you move through the world. You care deeply without being desperate, love fully without being needy, work diligently without being driven. Your very being becomes an invitation for others to step out of their own wrestling matches with life and into the possibility of their own dance. The ego's need to control dissolves into the self's trust in the greater choreography of existence. You discover that you are both the dancer and the danced, both the one who chooses the steps and the one who is moved by forces beyond your comprehension. In this paradox, you find the ultimate freedom, not the freedom from life, but the freedom to dance with whatever life brings, knowing that your essence remains untouchable, regardless of the complexity of the choreography. There comes a moment in the soul's journey when the long exile ends, when the wanderer finally arrives at the gates of their own kingdom, not the kingdom they imagined they would rule, built on the conquered territories of others' approval or the pillaged wealth of external validation, but the true realm that has always been theirs by birthright, the vast, mysterious territory of their own integrated being. Here, in the sacred chamber of self-sovereignty, awaits a throne that can only be claimed through the paradox of surrender. This is not the throne of the tyrant who rules through force, nor the seat of the puppet king who governs at the whim of others' expectations. This is the throne of the wise ruler who understands that true power comes not through domination, but through integration, not through conquest, but through the radical act of coming home to oneself. You have earned this seat not through battle, but through the far more difficult work of making peace. Peace with your shadow, peace with your light, peace with the full spectrum of what it means to be gloriously, completely human. The ascent to this throne has required you to traverse territories that would have terrified your earlier self. You have walked through the valley of your own shadow, acknowledging the parts of yourself you once disowned. You have climbed the mountain of your own magnificence, claiming the gifts you once deflected. You have crossed the desert of your own solitude, learning to find sustenance in the oasis of your own company. Each step has been both a dying and a birthing, each arrival a preparation for the next departure. Jung understood this throne as the archetype of the self in its fully realized form, not the ego sitting on a borrowed chair, desperately trying to maintain control through manipulation and force, but the integrated psyche governing from a place of authentic authority. This is the monarch who rules not through fear, but through love, not through division, but through the recognition that all aspects of the kingdom are part of one living organism. From this seat of power, you govern your inner realm with the wisdom of one who has been both the rebellious subject and the tyrannical ruler, who has learned through direct experience that the only sustainable leadership is the kind that serves the highest good of all. Your thoughts no longer run wild like unruly citizens rioting in the streets of your mind. Instead, they move with purpose and direction, guided by the deeper intelligence that has learned to distinguish between the voice of wisdom and the chatter of fear. Your emotions, once like tempestuous weather systems that could devastate your inner landscape, now flow like rivers that nourish the kingdom rather than flood it. You have learned the difference between feeling your emotions and being overwhelmed by them, between honoring their messages and being enslaved by their demands. The sovereign self feels deeply but governs wisely, allowing emotion to inform but never to dictate the decisions that shape your life. This inner monarchy operates on principles that would seem paradoxical to the ego-driven consciousness. The more you surrender control, the more control you actually have.